Thank you for coming. I'm going to introduce myself, and then I'm going to have everyone introduce themselves. Have everyone introduce. I'm going to have you introduce yourself. Got it. And then we'll kind of dive in. I hope that you get something out of this. I will say this is probably my least favorite workshop of every classical conference I've ever been to, primarily because I felt like I have to go because I'm a science teacher at a classical school, but I've never really gotten anything out of one of these workshops that made me feel like I was better prepared to go back to my school and do something classically. I'm a trained chemist, undergraduate in biochemistry, master's in chemistry. I later went on and got a doctorate in education, but my background is in the hard sciences. When I was hired at a classical school, I think I was hired primarily because of my resume. I was not a classicist, although I had had more exposure to it than I realized, being a part of a great books program in the honors college where I attended, but that had no connection to science. It was, we would spend 2 hours in this building and do integrated humanities, and then we would go do science, and we would go do math or whatever. So when I was hired at the classical school in Orlando, at the Geneva School, the first thing they did was send me to a CERSI conference. And I went, this is great. This is it. This is education. This is what I've been looking for my whole life. I have found it. Andrew Kern was a speaker. And I remember calling my wife the first chance I had, first break. I was like, it was kind of like that scene in Back to the Future where they discovered the guitar. And like Chuck Berry was calling his friend while the music was playing. He was holding his phone out. And what it was Andrew Kern had said classical education was the cultivation of wisdom and virtue. And I thought, this is it. This is it. This is what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. I'm all done. I'm all in, right? And so I sat through this conference, and then there was this Q&A session at the end, and I was so excited. Finally, I was going to get to ask the question that was burning a hole in my soul. So I raised my hands. Andrew called on me, and I said, I've just been hired by a classical school to teach chemistry, and I've loved what I've heard the last 3 days, but I just have one question. Where does chemistry fit in? He goes, it doesn't. And then next question.
Wow.
And I was crushed. I had no idea. I was crushed, but I was also angry. And so that set me on this crusade to redeem and find chemistry's place in the classical tradition. I will say, though, that was, let's see, how old's my youngest kid? 15. That was 15 years ago. And I might finally be willing to say that he's right. Kinda. Okay? So, I tried at first, somewhat in vain, to convince myself that if I taught modern science with a classical pedagogy, then I could consider myself a classicist, a classical educator. Ultimately, that felt a little unfulfilling. I think I kind of knew that wasn't really classical education. Meanwhile, one of the best and worst parts about working at Geneva is Robbie James across the hall doing this integrated physics, calculus, and philosophy course that was just completely puzzling to me. We called it the scientific revolution. And it was a little bit puzzling to all of us. We had really no idea what was happening in there. The kids would come out confused, like their eyes would be all crooked and everything. But somehow by the end of this thing, he had turned people into virtuous scholars. And so it was pretty cool to see. But when my thoughts finally started coming together was a few years ago. I somehow talked University of Dallas into letting me teach a class on science pedagogy at a classical school, which I still don't know how I talked them into it. But they said yes, and I went, oh, okay, so now I guess I got to figure out actually what I want to do. And so I created this course in my mind that the school I was at that point actually wouldn't let me teach. They wanted me to teach modern science out of modern textbooks, because that's what that's what the contingency, that's what the consumer wanted. But when I came here, I was talking to Brad, and I said, this is kind of what I'm thinking. He goes, it sounds great. I was like, are you sure? Because it's not what other people are doing. He goes, no, I trust you. Do it. And so we actually teach a natural philosophy course in 9th grade. We're also doing it in 12th grade to get both of those kind of bookended, although now it looks like we're going to shift towards an integrated humanities program that's going to have natural philosophy built into that as well. So we're even taking one step further into the great unknown. But that's where I'm coming to this. So what I wanted to share with you today is really kind of what I read, what I've done that has shaped my practices and the way that I'm thinking about science. And I'm also really interested in you getting a chance to share those things or say those things that have been most useful to you. So I have an outline that's going to be roughly in play. I copied some resources for you. We may not get to them. Two of them are articles that I've written, not for shameless self-promotion, but simply for you to see kind of what I'm thinking, or if you want to look back at it later. And then there's a guided inquiry activity in there for you to see kind of how I'm imagining a way to teach science that's a little more in heart or in line with the way that it was discovered. So can we go around the room and introduce ourselves real quick? Tell me what you teach, how long you've been doing it, and maybe, not to sound like a cornball, but what you're hoping to get out of the workshop today.
Sure. Yeah. I'm Jacob Duvier. I teach at Providence in St. Louis. I'm a humanities teacher, but I was a philosophy major in college, and I have children who are going to be in science classrooms one day, so I have a vested interest in this topic being fleshed out, and eager to hear where things stand right now.
Chandler Coleman. I teach at Sacred Classical Academy. I teach natural sciences, logic, things like that.
Excellent.
And my background is also in philosophy and philosophical logic. So trying to find the overlap between science and a way of describing it cleanly and articulating for students to practice.
Did you say philosophical logic?
Yes, sir.
Good.
Brian Polk, retired military chaplain, board member of the local school here, and I have a minor in philosophy from years ago, so I'm an observer. I'm going to compare to what I was taught and what we're teaching.
Sounds good.
Ann Davis. I teach 3-year-olds.
Yeah. Hey. That's where it
But
starts.
but I have grandkids, and my kids I taught, and I can stand here and look at this.
I'm Cindy Blank. I have a master's in gifted. I taught 16 years at the public school, and then I moved to Texas and taught 8 years at a classical Christian school there, which is where I learned classical education. And then I moved back to Missouri, and I'm teaching at a first-year school in Willow Springs called Neighborhood Christian
Yeah.
Academy. And so I teach pre-algebra and earth science there.
Good.
And I'm just hoping to. I haven't taught. This is the 8th graders. That's the highest I've taught. So I'm just. Usually it's been 6th grade and under. So I'm just looking for insight on how to ramp up the.
I was a gifted student.
My name is Molly Measham, and I'm actually an electrical engineer.
Ooh,
and
double
I
E.
have designed robots and control systems, and like if you've ever had a Lunchable, I did the automation system that makes Lunchables. And yeah, my mom worked for this place called NASA for like 48 years. But anyway, currently I teach Algebra 2, and I have taught chemistry and physics and just about everything, science-y, and math, at all levels of math. And I'm trying to figure out how to do this classically. Like we're talking
sure.
about.
A series of repentances, I think.
Yes,
I'm still Brad's comment there.
My turn.
Yes, sir.
Craig Felty. I'm at Runnels Classical Academy in Big Spring, Texas. First year in classical. I've taught 24 years in the public schools, 11 years in choral music, and 13 years in sciences.
Okay.
Basically a secondary, comprehensive science certified. My undergraduate degree is in music. My master's is Master of Divinity, and so my science background just comes from being a nerd.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, I'm here because This was the one that sounded kind of sciencey. That's what I'm doing now. I'm teaching, teach choral music, science, and Latin in the school.
Yeah.
So,
Kevin Clark would be very excited to know that someone trained in music is teaching science. That would be.
yeah, I was very sciencey in high school. In college, I fell in love with music and was traveling, doing kind of evangelistic music, traveling and stuff like that, and fell in love with music. And now I'm back in science.
Yeah, yeah. That was the funny thing about Robbie Jane. He was a political science major, but just had a love for physics and math. Okay.
I'm Mark Meese. This is my wife. She's just with me. She is a musician too. So
He
music teacher.
uses.
I have taught for 30 years science, 20 years actually in Catholic school, even though I'm not Catholic, and then last 10 years or so in classical school, Wichita. And by this time, I've taught just about everything. I'm currently teaching AP biology and a physics class. I've taught chemistry. 7th grade earth science is a favorite of mine. I'm glad you're doing this topic because I've been frustrated, and I'm hoping to not feel like the stepsister here.
Right.
And I'll just put my 2 cents in.
Sure.
We do a real hands-on program. I've got a whole engineering part that we do. In fact, we're doing engineering 1, 2, 3, and 4. We have tools and everything, and we do it right. I'll just say that.
Mm-hmm.
That's my conviction. We teach the science right, and if the classical people don't like it, that's their problem. So that's kind of where I'm at. And so at some point we got to come to the terms that classical education does not exclude hard science,
right.
and it does not exclude chemistry. So, but I'm very interested in what you have to say.
Okay.
So,
I'm David Lundy. But you knew that.
I knew that.
And
I've heard
I
of
teach
you.
here at SofO. I teach 6th grade, so our science includes chemistry and physics. And so part of what I want to see is, hey, what's coming up for these kids after they get past me? But also, I have a daughter that's in his 9th grade class right now, so I hear her end of it, and I want to hear his end of it. So.
What's the rule? I believe half of what they say about you if you believe half of what they say about me.
I'm Andrea Martin, and I also teach at SofO. I teach math in the high school, and we've had 3 kids already go through, but our baby is in a sophomore this year. And because I'm mathy, sciencey, I like to go to topics like this. Just the whole STEM versus natural philosophy is an interesting topic to me, and I kind of feel like, well, I'll just let you talk, but I'm just interested to hear. I've heard you have conversations with other people about it, but maybe all that discovery and wonder and lab stuff could happen younger, but I don't feel like it does. And then they don't get that hands-on stuff. But I have a similar. My kids aren't math and sciencey, so it doesn't really affect them, but and I wish they were. But anyway, but I have a passion for it too.
Melissa Didle. I teach at Veritas Christian. This is my 7th year teaching. Both I was in public school and then a different private school and now this private school. And teach science and math, high school science and math. I'm with Molly. I want to see how this can work with the classical. I'm very new to that whole idea. So
I'm Charity Harris, and I also teach at Veritas Christian School. I teach 6th grade, so I teach all subjects. This is my 2nd year at a classical school. I came from public schools. So I'm still trying to figure out what a classical education is. It's all new to me. And
They say 7 years is how long it takes to figure it out.
Oh, great. And also just kind of figuring out how to teach science too, because I came from 2nd grade and
It's to 0 yet.
new things.
I'm Yvonne Moore. I have a I teach geometry, physical science, and chemistry at Trinity Christian Academy in St. Charles. This is my first year. I was in the public school a long time ago, and then it's taken about 24, 25 years to homeschool our 7 children. But number 7 didn't want to be homeschooled by himself, so we ended up at Trinity. And let me see, what do I want to get out of it? Basically, how to teach classically and how to really integrate that biblical worldview while trying to make sure everything else has to be covered.
Yeah, not a big deal, right? How do I teach this as a Christian? How do I teach this classically? How do I honor what we need for to enter into a STEM field? How do I make the parents happy? How do I make the administrators happy? How do I have time to set up labs, tear down labs? Where do I get the money for?
Tearing down, moving things around.
Yeah. I actually met a guy at a conference one time that taught math, and he goes, "Yeah, for my first few years I taught biology and chemistry and realized this is totally not worth it." He's like, "My prep." One way to look at it. Back row.
What am I supposed to tell them?
Name, where you're from, and what you're hoping to get out of the workshop.
Bill Cox, I'm from West Plains and Ozarks Christian Academy. I've been helping them for 2 years. I've, for nearly 40 years, been pastoring. I did have a degree in chemistry that I've forgotten and having to relearn. I don't say I teach chemistry. I was taught long ago. You teach the students, which I still enjoy.
Yeah.
I don't enjoy the chemistry near as much, although I learned how to do, work with them on the chemistry part. Sure. And I came into the class because it's sciencey.
Yeah.
I'm Tabby Odell, and I teach the fine arts at Ozarks Christian Academy. I enjoy science, so that's why I chose to come into this class.
Excellent. All right, so we've got a range. Fair enough to say. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Warfield.
My name's Charlie. I'm on my 10th year here at School of the Ozarks. I'm attending to maybe get some ammo to get under your skin.
It is nerve-wracking. I've got students and colleagues in here. It's like sharing your faith. You want to go on a mission trip where nobody knows you, right? This is so vulnerable. So let me let a few cats out of the bag. What do you say? Right?
Okay.
So first, I'll answer the overarching question of the title of this workshop, just so that you don't have to guess where I'm landing on this. Right? I think science is a way of doing natural philosophy. It's not the only way. I think and when I say science, primarily I'm referring to empirical, observational science. Right? I think we all agree, if pushed a little bit, that our 5 senses is not the only way to know anything, right? It's a very good way to know things. I think we also probably need to keep in mind that when people say science, they mean a range of things. I've been obviously science has been in the forefront of what's been driving public policy decisions, and many times people mean inferential statistics. They don't actually mean hard science. If you compare the public health decisions around the mask compared to the public health decisions around vaccines, public health decision around vaccines is based on a randomized controlled trial. The public health decision based on a mask is based on inferential statistics. Those are two different things, right? Both of them can be used for us to try to understand and draw conclusions and make decisions. So, science or empirical observational science, science using the scientific method, is a way of doing natural philosophy. Okay, that's my stake. That's my line in the sand. So my dream of a classical school would be that the grammar stage, and I guess since we're throwing stuff out and we're being honest with each other, I don't really like Dorothy Sayers' categories for those things. I think they're artificial. I think you do lots of grammar in the rhetoric school, and I think you're probably doing a little bit of rhetoric in the grammar school. And hopefully, as long as God's on the throne, as long as Jesus is on the throne, we're doing logic all the way through. Okay. But with that said, it provides a reasonable overall organizational principle. And I don't know that Dorothy Sayers even would be as dogmatic about it as many people that have applied her. So, but in the early stages, we'll say K through, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go birth through 5, 5th graders. So, I think you have one goal, and that is to cultivate wonder. My grammar school science teachers, when we were at Geneva, kept begging us, what do you want them to know? What do you want them to know? What do you want them to know? And we would always say the same thing. I don't care if they know anything. I just want them to be curious, and I want them to have wonder, right? And part of that comes from the fact is, you know, when my first teaching job was college, and I remember all the college professors would sit around and go, I don't know what these kids are doing in high school. They don't know anything. They don't even know what a neutron is, right? And then I was like, oh man, those high school teachers are terrible. And then I started teaching high school, and all the high school teachers would get together. I don't know what's wrong with these kids. I don't know what they're doing in middle school. These kids don't know anything. They don't even know what a neutron is, right? And then I started teaching middle school, and I went, wait, this is not fair. These kids have been told what a neutron is a bunch of times, right? So telling them what a neutron is not the answer. And in fact, again, I'll throw another line in the sand. Most of the science that's taught, in my opinion, from the textbooks is really more trivia. It's facts, things to remember, definitions, which have value. Please understand, it has value, but let's not pretend that's really the nature of inquiry. Right? How often do your kids ask scientific questions? Science at its heart is questions and inquiry. And if all they're doing is memorizing facts, then you're essentially teaching a history class. Right? But they're not going to remember any of this. Anyways, okay. So, birth to 5th grade, wonder. I think you can do that most easily through natural history. Just to kind of get some commonality with terms. And then we enter whole cannonball into the logic of inquiry. The class I'm teaching right now to 8th graders, the first semester, and it spilled over because I didn't finish, was formal logic using Wilson's book. And then now we're turning more into some inquiry or trying to apply logical thinking to scientific phenomena. And all year people have been asking me, are you teaching logic or science? Yes. You teaching logic or science? Yes. Both. Same thing. Right? It's the way of thinking. And furthermore, a firm understanding of deduction and induction, that's at the heart of scientific inquiry across the board. The other thing, okay, so again, I'm just throwing out bombs. It's the last session. You guys are getting home. I hate the scientific method. I think it needs to be put in a box and buried deep inside the ground. Right? If science is the application of the scientific method to discover truth, then you basically have just punted Einstein. And I'm not willing to punt Einstein. That doesn't, what'd you say?
Explain yourself. What does that mean?
Yeah, so, well, Einstein didn't do experiments, right? So he's purely theoretical physicist. There were experiments done that verified the work that he's done. I think, so there's a couple of points. I have a philosophical problem with the scientific method, and that's the implication that the scientific method leads to truth. It's an epistemological conflict that I have with the scientific method, not a practical one, right? Practically, I think it works good for what it's designed to do, which is provide information on things that we can observe with our 5 senses. Did I answer your question? Okay. Very good. With that said, the language that I use, if we're, oh wait, let me finish this, and then I'm going to come back to models. Okay. So once we get to those middle years, we're going to do the logic of inquiry, and then I'm proposing an integrated humanities. All right, are you guys sitting down? Because I've got something else controversial to say. Science is a human endeavor because it's done by humans. Okay, that wasn't that much. Right? But I always felt left out of the party. there were these really interesting questions that were being asked, and these really interesting books that were being read, and I was over there trying to get them to memorize the common ions. Nitrate's a -1 for the 10th time. NO3, -1. Right? They're over there trying to figure out what it means to be human. What's human flourishing? I want to talk about human flourishing. Knowing the ions is human flourishing. So that was really the insight that I had. And it actually came from, I asked you to keep that book out. I have the paper copy of this that Robbie sent to me. Robbie. I actually was responsible for getting Robbie hired. I'd like credit for that. Because I didn't want to teach biology. Like, don't we have any applicants? The head of school was like, well, we got this one guy, but I don't have time to call him. I was like, I'll call him. And so I got Robbie hired. And then, but when they sent this, reading through it, this idea that once you take philosophy and you understand that there's moral philosophy and natural philosophy. So moral philosophy, more in the domain of ethics, more of what we would understand now as the social sciences. So this is your psychology, although some of that's probably hard science. It's obviously sociology, economics, political science, the way they practice history now, which is still a little bit puzzling to me. Education, if you study education at the graduate level, that's a combination of several different social sciences, right? That's different from the natural sciences or the natural philosophies where biology, chemistry, physics, and all of its friends would live. So once I thought of, you think of integrated humanities typically as literature, history, and philosophy, right? So when I was in college, again, something I took absolutely for granted, but being part of the honors college, they put 3 professors in one room for 2 years with 24 of us, and we walked all the way through the timeline from the ancient Near East up to modern times. A very impressive allocation of resources on their part, one. And then 2, we did it. We read the books that were written at that time. We talked about the philosophy that was at that time. But again, there was nothing natural about the philosophy. It was all moral philosophy. And so what I'm interested in, is there a way to put the natural philosophy back in, or not back, I don't know that it's been done, but can we put it into an integrated humanities questions? Because again, these guys were asking questions. I would say guys and girls. There's not as many girls that we have records of. Certainly they were there. But they were asking questions that hung together with all the other things at the time, right? I mean, a lot of what comes out of the scientific revolution, specifically with Newton publishing the Principia, has profound implication on the way we answer what it means to be human and what is human flourishing. It's profound, right? But we don't teach it that way. Okay, so yeah. Once we get everything fully built, the final program, so right now at School of the Ozarks, they would have done biology in 9th grade, physics, astronomy in 10th grade, and then chemistry in 11th grade, and then a natural philosophy course as the senior year. That's what these 2 are in right now. The first plan was to move that natural philosophy course to 9th grade as kind of an introduction. I call it the Ghosts of Christmas Past, Present, and Future, or Science Past, Present, and Future. As science students should feel like they're getting dropped into a movie right in the middle, right? They're never really told where all this has come from. You're just supposed to figure it out as you go, right? It doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not intuitive to teach it that way, but that's what we do. The way we're going to shift now is we're going to do the integrated humanities, and then the senior year they'll pull back out and they'll get a formal treatment of biology and chemistry. So basically think of introductory college level courses now that they're mature enough to handle some more of the heavy lifting after having a deep dive into where all of this stuff comes from, right? So when I teach them chemistry as seniors, we're not going to have to go all the way back to Democritus and to John Dalton and to Chadwick and Avogadro and everything. They'll have already read some or most of that stuff in their integrated humanities program, along with their understanding of what matter is. The other thing I hope that they walk out of this is with those questions. I mean, it's just remarkable to realize how much we still are trying to learn, that we're spending billions of dollars hurling particles at each other close to the speed of light just to see what happens. Just to see what happens. We don't know. Right? These are fascinating big questions with profound implications. So let me redeem the scientific method. I think scientists make models. I like this as a metaphor because models are never actually reality. They approach reality and truth, but I don't think scientists ought to be about discovering truth. When you do that too, you take that face science thing and you let a lot of air out of the balloon. Right? These aren't competing for truth. This is not, the conflict hypothesis is that we have two competing methods of understanding the world, and it's a zero-sum game. That's problematic, at least for me as a Christian and as someone trained in the hard sciences. I don't like the conflict hypothesis. I don't think anybody wins. But if scientists is not trying to, get rid of God, although certainly the starting place for many modern natural scientists is that there's no God. But if that's not, if they're not in the domain of truth, so to some extent, I'm calling us to reclaim the domain of truth, right? That we've ceded to them, so that we're doing that. But if we're making models, then that's fine, right? Evolution's a model. This is not something that has the ability to distill your child's soul and damn them to hell. This is just a model, right? DNA is a model. We used to build little model cars as a kid, right? They get better, right? There's more sophisticated models, more complex models. We get empirical data to confirm or deny the model, but what we're trying to do is get closer and closer and closer and closer to the real thing, which we would all agree is God and His creation. Which in my mind brings to mind epistemological questions and epistemological landmines that we have to be aware of. We have to talk about as we go. Okay, that's where I'm at. Any questions thus far? I'm halfway through my outline. Yes?
On your definition, is there a difference between a theory and a model?
Yeah, that's a good question. So most people will use the term model as something that has the ability to have more of a physical representation, whereas a theory is more of an attempt to explain. People do this a lot of times, and that's part of the problem with the scientific method. When I was little and we did our little science projects and everything, it was always, observation, hypothesis, experiment, theory. And then if your theory stood the test of time, it became a law. This is the problem with things. I mean, we don't have a law of atoms. We have atomic theory. So a theory is an attempt to explain. A theory is more of the model, right? Mathematical models that we use, to explain relativity or whatever would be in that domain. So I don't think theories turn into laws when they're proven. I think that's a mistake from the way that we were taught. And granted, I'm probably younger than most of you. When we talk about natural, I'm sorry, did I say younger? I meant older. I forget. Okay, when we were learning science in the 80s and the 90s, that's kind of how it was. And now, when we talk about a natural law, we're talking about something that can be measured, like the universal law of gravitation, Coulomb's law. These are what we think of as natural laws. So theories don't grow and mature into laws. And I'll tell my students there, you're welcome to try to dismantle evolution until the cows come home. But please don't say it's just a theory, right? Because at that point, so are atoms. And we're pretty sure they exist. But we're not totally sure what they're made up of. Maybe little strings. Does that answer your question?
No, absolutely.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, so I'm assuming this is all going back to the fact that the empirical observational method is inherently inductive, and therefore you're not entirely sure what's going to happen if new data comes in that could completely upset the apple cart. Is that the reason why we're saying it's just a model?
Yep.
It seems persuasive and accurate as of now, but if all of a sudden I let go of this and it floats up to the ceiling, we have to rethink gravity.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, or we have to, maybe time's running backwards.
Right.
Just hit it, right?
Yeah.
Big crunch. Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think if science is falsifiable, right, then we can't, in my mind, truth would not be falsifiable, right? So we have to just be careful with our language there. Other questions? Yeah.
Just practically, talking about, teaching the basics, trying to get kids to understand, different factoids and models and things like that. But going back and basically ignoring that for reading historical, philosophical basis, and then coming back around to it when they can handle it. I guess there's really not anything that would tell us, how's that going to fit in with, going into a college level situation.
Yeah, fair question. I think knowing how to think is the goal, and having some familiarity with really at the nuts and bolts level of how these things fit together. I think part of what has given me confidence in that area is they've done studies of kids that got 5s on the AP Physics and the AP Chemistry test at Harvard. They gave them the same test in September. So they took it in May, got a 5, which is pretty impressive, right? They give it to them again in August. 70-80% of them can't pass it, right? So you're right. I'm not telling them some things, but I'm also not under any pretense that everything I tell them that they will remember.
Yeah.
Whereas I hope that if it's grounded and rooted and connected to other things, I mean, even from neuroscience perspective, like when our thoughts and understandings are attached to other things, we tend to remember them better. So, maybe they really know what an atom is, even if they can't quite calculate the number of neutrons from a mass number. Because again, that's easy. They'll pick that right back up.
Even in public school, I got to the point where I was just telling my kids, I need to teach you some skills.
Yeah.
You can access the tables, the information, what are the polyatomic ions, you can access on your little phone in 3 seconds. But I need to teach you some basic skills of how to use it, how to recognize it, kind of see what's going on. From there, you're kind of on.
Right.
So you're extending that to really some heavier understanding of the philosophy behind it. So.
Yeah, and again, I think even as we use the term philosophy there, so if you compare the term science to philosophy, science, of course, is being knowledge, that's not new information. To you guys, philosophy being the love of wisdom, it's like if I'm rooting for one of those teams, I'm rooting for the wisdom team, right? Now, in best case scenario, my dream scenario in the little perfect world that lives inside of my head is that they're going to come out with both, right? They're going to come out with wonder and curiosity and the ability to ask questions and lots of scientific vocabulary. But if I had to pick one, I'm more interested in knowing how science makes them human than I am in them knowing science trivia. But in a perfect world, we're getting. But I mean, even in the public school model, and if you look at what's the new science next gen science standards, this is very integrated, very cross-cutting. Like we're not the classicists aren't the only ones trying to figure out how to do this better. Like I think we all kind of intuitively know that all the 9th graders need to know biology, and all the 10th graders need to know chemistry, and all the 11th graders need to know physics. Is not in the Bible, right? And we really don't have good reasons for that. I mean, there's been a number of times where I've just gone, you're going to one day be a great chemistry student. Right now, you're not. Right? You have not matured enough and developed those abilities to abstract. Because, again, we're spending all year talking about something that's invisible, something that is smaller than light. Wait, didn't you show me a picture of an atom? Showed you a model. Right? This thing is invisible. That's a lot of abstraction. And then it gets even wackier because protons and neutrons aren't even fundamental particles. They're made up of quarks. What are quarks made up of? We think that's as small as it gets, but maybe not. Maybe they're made up of strings, right? I mean, these are really fascinating questions that have profound impact. There's also really profound philosophical implications of the reductionism that we risk exporting to them if we're not careful. So that's the other things. Is that there's things that we're telling them explicitly, and there's things that we're telling them implicitly when we go too hard into the scientific method, even though we know that all truth is God's truth, and we know that the truth is in the Bible, revealed to us through nature, through the scriptures. If we go really hard on the scientific method, then we are implicitly communicating to our students that this is how you know things. How do you know Christ was resurrected, rose from the dead? Well, we do have some historical evidence. We have a lot of historical evidence for that. But in terms of, how do I know God is real? Can I put him in a beaker? Can I test him? Can I drop some phenolphthalein in there and see if he turns pink? If that's the only way of knowing, which again, lots of people have agreed that that's the only way of knowing, that has implications. And again, there's a real risk of teaching science in a way that we are implicitly confirming those suggestions. Okay, do we want to talk about faith and science? I feel like I kind of scratched the surface. I will say the best resource, I'll start with just kind of an anecdote. Every time somebody, so I show a lot of little ed-teds and different videos in class and stuff. And every time the Big Bang comes up, I see like one or two students start kind of shifting in their seats. Like I'm a little afraid they're going to bolt, like run out of the room screaming. And then there's a 50-50 chance that I'm getting fired. That's kind of what goes through my head every single time. In my mind, again, the Big Bang's a model. I'm not scared of the Big Bang, right? God spoke into the darkness, created light. Pretty good chance there's a noise, right? Big flash of light. Furthermore, Big Bang proposed by a Catholic priest. Like this guy's on our team, right? We've got a lot of evidence that the universe is expanding, which kind of says bang, right? We don't have to be scared of that as a thing in and of itself, right? Furthermore, my, to kind of use Tim Keller's phrasing of it, I want to see our students immunized against secular humanism and against naturalism. And, the way our bodies develop immunity is to be exposed to it in small doses, right? So I don't want my students to go to college and then some really smart, winsome person, way smarter and more winsomer than I am, stands up and starts telling them that they're just atoms hurling through the cosmos. Right? They're just space dust, although from dust we were made to dust we were made. That's a whole other thing. But we're certainly more than space dust, right? We're image bearers. We've never met a mere mortal. These are the things that are important. These are the things that are true about us as humans, right? As created beings. These are things that aren't necessarily empirically verifiable. Made in the image of God, let's do this science project, 5 steps. It's problematic, right? But yet we know it to be true. So that's kind of my take on it. I've already mentioned the conflict hypothesis. There's I put it on here somewhere. The 5B, the teachfastly.com is a project I was involved in with Calvin College, where we went there and tried to develop some resources for Bible teachers and for science teachers to find some common language and some common ways and categories to think about how faith and science fit together. Again, one of my favorite quotes, and I forget who said it, but they said, science and faith are opposed as a finger and thumb are opposed. Together they hold everything. Right? The other way, if you look at the Belgic Confession, we know God in 2 ways, right? One by the revealed scripture, one by the book of nature. That's a metaphor I try to put in my students' minds, that we're reading the book of nature. And that's the book of creation that has been given to us. And we've been given the skills and ability and gift of inquiry and observation to do that. So that's the faith and science. Let me just share some resources with you. Again, things that have shaped my thinking. So the liberal arts tradition has a pretty good section on natural philosophy in here. This is the expanded version of the natural philosophy section, the new natural philosophy. If you're serious about trying to figure this out, those are the first 2 books that you should read. If you wonder why everybody has such weird views of science, you could read Scandal of the Evangelical Mind, Jesus Christ and Life of the Mind, Fundamentalism in Christian America, All these are books by historians at Notre Dame and Wheaton that tried to kind of capture this anti-science sentiment that exists in some of our places. This is, no, we'll save that for last because that's the best. This is a reader, The History and Philosophy of Science. Some professors at maybe BU, I'd have to look, Boston University, I think. But they basically went through and got all the major writings of natural philosophy and science and pulled out the relevant sections. So like the introduction to the Principia is in here, but not the whole Principia, obviously. And across all the disciplines. It's a little bit expensive. There is a digital version. The other thing is if you bought one of these or got your administrators to buy one of these for you, you can then find, most of these are in the public domain, and you can just kind of look at how they curated them. But it's an invaluable resource. I will say my students don't like reading it. Is that true? Yeah. It's dense. It's a hard translation. Probably best served together with jokes in the middle. It's probably about your best chance of getting through it. But again, in my dream world, I would have students that would love to just like read through this thing. Like, can we read through this thing this whole year? But that's probably not going to happen. This is a book called The History and Philosophy of Science, really organized by worldviews, which captures these big shifts. So the classical thinking, the metaphor, the world, creation is an organism. It's alive. It's doing things. It has a purpose. It has a function, right? This is Aristotle. You know, the rocks fall to the ground because they want to be with other rocks. It is their nature to be with rocks. The smoke rises to the air because it wants to be with other air particles. Water flows to the river because water wants to be with water, right? Or gravity, but either way, right? And then Newton comes along and really kind of on the heels of Galileo. Newton was born the day Galileo died, for what it's worth. But Newton comes in and basically says, no, the world is a machine, right? Space is a stage, and everything is playing out on this stage, right? Newton's wrong. He's wrong about the stage. Einstein comes around and goes, gravity's the curvature of space and time. And then that's where the world we live in now, where we're still trying to unwrap the implications of that, right? This world of relativity, this world of the nano level, the nanoscale, the quantum realm, these weird physical rules that govern the quantum realm also seem to work in the cosmos, but the equations kind of break down in the world that we live in. Is there a way to unify these things? These are the questions that we're now. And this book kind of captures the fact that this is the way our thinking has progressed. Now, what's interesting for us as Christians is we still believe things have a purpose and a function, right? But we believe God's creation is great and given to us and for reasons, right? So that's pretty useful too. There is evolution in the end of that book, just to warn you. So this is what I call my Ghost of Christmas or Science Past. So this is kind of the, where do we come from? This is the where we are, 10 Great Ideas of Science. Goes through space-time, atoms, evolution's in there. What's some symmetry, quantum is in there. So this is what I use to kind of give to my students this idea of this is where we are. I didn't have another book that I didn't bring that's the future, Physics of the Future. This is the other thing I'm doing this year, which is the first time I've done it, but in an attempt to kind of cultivate their imagination about science, because I think imagination has a place in science as well. We're reading the Space Trilogy. We did Out of the Silent Planet the first quarter. We did Paralandra the second quarter, and now we're in that Hideous Strength. There's a brain or a head that's hooked to a computer, and Merlin was just dug up. So really exciting things are happening. And then we're going to end with The Abolition of Man. And of course, The Abolition of Man was written, or that Hideous Strength is a fictionalized account of the abolition of man. So that's, we just do it on Fridays. It's kind of like a little book club. We just kind of sit and talk about what we're reading. But again, an attempt to kind of get science into their imagination of what it means to be human. And Lewis's writing in the 1940s, it's just shocking how relevant it is. Definitely before its time. Okay, and there's a few other resources I put on there. I will mention I do quite a bit of inquiry in class, which is, I put an example one. These are called POGLs. I was first exposed to those when I was in grad school 20 years ago. But it's process-oriented guided inquiry learning. And so it's learning science the way science is done. So it's all model-based. So instead of me going, again, not to pick on the neutron. I like neutrons, by the way. They really are magical. It always bugs me that nobody says, wait. The nucleus is incredibly dense, full of positive charge. Why? Why doesn't it fly apart? That's the question you should be asking. No one's ever asked me that. The answer, of course, is the neutron, strong nuclear force. But right? Like, don't you think that's an intuitive question? You're telling me this thing is incredible. You're telling me the atom is mostly empty space. Electron are God knows where in the universe, right? And then all the protons are crammed into this tiny region of space. Anyways, I digress. But this would be, this is how I would teach atomic structure. And then if you couple that with the context of actually reading Dalton, or you can read Chadwick's work, you can read Rutherford's work and his discovery of the nucleus. Again, it doesn't have to be a lot. It doesn't have to make a ton of sense. But also, if you can do it in the context of the way people are thinking about what it means to be human. Because again, going back to Newton, what Newton did for physics, Darwin did for biology. Right? It's the same thing that Lavoisier did for chemistry. Right? We can understand science using math just like Sir Isaac did. Yes, but we can also keep in mind that we're created beings and there's a beautiful world that we were given the gifts to discover. Okay, I didn't talk about labs. It's like Bruno. I don't want to talk about Bruno. We can talk about labs if you want to. And I also say I have a robots club. So as much as I sound like the weird science teacher that doesn't really teach science, we have a robot club. We participate in the Science Olympiad, right? Okay, good. Questions? I'll get off of my soapbox. I guarantee you half of the people in the room are like, that's great. The other half are like, this guy's ridiculous. That's fair.
I notice you have liberal arts tradition, you have abolition of man. Both of those touch on formal and final causation as it needing to be restored. Do you have any thoughts on that in particular?
No, I don't actually. I have thoughts on a lot of things. I will say that way of thinking and approaching stuff is a growth area for me. I'm really kind of have it on my things to do list this summer because that was one of I have a new manager, boss, whatever, chair at University of Dallas, and his challenge to me was to connect modern science to Aristotelian thought. And so that's going to be phase 2. Maybe if you come back next year, we'll do that talk.
The little bits I've been able to glean, that does seem to be perhaps the missing link between classical education and science is how do you reintegrate the fact that things have a nature that we don't get to decide, like God does because God made it as that kind of thing, and then ultimately because it has a definition, has a nature, it therefore has a purpose that we don't get to decide.
Right. Yeah, it's the Talos are thinking of matter or nature as an organism. I really think the problem with Aristotle is it's a baby with the bathwater issue, right? And I think, and I'm certainly not the only one trying to figure out where he fits into it. But he does, yes, to answer your question, he absolutely does. Even though he was wrong about, X number of things.
Because you mentioned some stuff about quantum mechanics and four basic forces.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't looked at that for 4 years. I bet that's a lot different now. What would you recommend I read to reintroduce myself?
Yeah, that's where I think something like Galileo's finger which is actually named Galileo's fingers in a museum in Florence. Interestingly, it's his middle finger. I'm not gonna pretend that has any implication, but it is a relic that was stored. But this is a very good snapshot of kind of where science is presently. I love all the documentaries too, of just like the the cosmos and all of those things, because there really are there's a lot of information coming out now, with understanding more about what a black hole is and kind of its effects on the cosmos, and then really big things and really small things seem to be capturing theoretical physicists' imaginations right now, but they don't have answers. They have way more questions than answers. But something like that, or the other one, there's a documentary on CERN called Particle Fever, which is fascinating. It's one of my favorites. It's the discovery of the Higgs boson, which is there's some other really interesting stuff. So they're trying to figure out if it's supersymmetry, or if there's a multiverse at play, and they need the Higgs boson to come out of this certain mass, a certain electron volt, to prove which theory is correct. And it turns out it splits it. It's right in the middle, and all the theoretical physicists just get we discovered the Higgs, which is excellent, right? Moving on, yeah.
Do you think it would be helpful to teach a scientific method around logical inquiry? Because your epistemological differences with the scientific method is really helpful, because you can have a valid argument form and it doesn't guarantee that you're talking about something true.
Yes.
It is something that we use, that if you're working in a context that is well taught using philosophy and theology, you can come to something similarly reliable. Do you think that might be helpful?
It would. If I had my preference, the scientific method would never be uttered again in my preference. But if we do need it somewhere, then we could put it into the logic of inquiry and couch it in that that way of thinking. Because again, there's nothing wrong with empirical observation. Let's just quit pretending that this is the only way to get to truth. Right.
Right. It can be something comparative in the broader examination of how do humans interact with God's creation in a reasoned way that doesn't always require I have to be physically present with it, because in a sense God is somehow present with us but we can't perceive that.
Yeah.
What are other ways that we have of arriving at the truth which gets at where this presentation has been?
Yeah. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. There's epistemology is all over this, but again, kind of like my knowledge of Aristotle, I'm pretty quick to admit my lack of formal training in the area. But I really love the idea that 6th, 7th, and 8th grade could really be all in on logical thinking, maybe in the context of modern science or modern scientific thought, thing that has some real value. And I mean, I think also you could go ahead and get to the lab stuff there, But again, the problem with labs is a lot of it is just cookbook stuff. There's not really much difference between making a shepherd's pie and titrating an acid or a base. It's just more dangerous, more expensive. But if you have really good lab stuff that takes multiple days and there's inquiry at the heart of it, and the answer maybe is not even known, then I think it has some value. And that's where I could see kind of using. We need because you can even discover we need some method to approach the answering of this problem. But the academic literature is not very in support of labs either. We all say they're very important, and I think there's a part of me that wants to believe that, and I think they can be if they're done well. I think putting a kid in a room with a box full of parts and building a robot has a lot more value than doing little, corny labs that the answer is already known.
Although when the experiment goes wrong, it's very memorable.
Yeah, I mean that's a common refrain, but even then, I'm just not convinced they know what they're doing. Especially for a lot of the things that I've done in chemistry, it's so complex that we're having to kind of scaffold it and put it together in ways that it's, and usually it went wrong because somebody stuck the wrong pipette in the wrong beaker, and then
We
tainted
didn't
the
know
whole
the
sample.
concentration of the hydrochloric acid or the sulfuric acid.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the thing too. It's all the OSHA rules have made it not fun. So we don't blow stuff up anymore. I mean, I used to do the whoosh bottle. Have you guys ever seen that? You take the water bottle, like the big, was it 5-gallon water bottle, whatever. You put a little isopropyl in there. You shake it around and you light a match. And it shoots a flame up. But I was reading through Flynn Scientific was where I ordered it, and they'd sent a warning out to all of them. Somebody was doing this in New York, and the bottle fell over. Like 3 kids went to the hospital. It's like, that's cool. It's fun. Is it worth it? Like, just don't want anybody to get hurt. Well, yeah, for some people.
My dad did an experiment in a school gym, and it blew the cork off the bottle and hit the windows and at the top of the gym. They wouldn't let him back.
Yeah. Yes, I like the old videos of the guys just taking these huge chunks of sodium out to the pond in the back. It's like 4th of July out there. I'm like, those poor fish. Those fish are dead. Yeah.
Do you have a science presentation you come show my high school that has some swoosh moments?
I have had those at times. I don't have all that stuff now. At one point I had a hydrogen tank. I had a lot of flammable stuff, but that was a different world. And then the other part too is when you think about the time and resources that we put into labs, oftentimes for not as much return on investment as we hope. This is what keeps you from reading books like that, right? Like we don't, we're science teachers. We don't have time to read philosophy.
The answer to my question was no.
Probably not. Yeah, I don't have enough stuff to. There was a time, but.
Do you think labs would be a good place for from birth to 5th to create the wonder? Because to me, when I was younger and we did labs, that's what really made me want to do science.
Yeah. I think lab sketching, observation. I think going outside for 30 minutes every day and where's the shadow, where's the sun, what kind of bugs, what the color is the grass. I think it can have profound implications both on your wonder and on your soul, right? Learning to be still. I was watching the Most Reluctant Convert the other day, the Lewis documentary, or I guess it's a dramedy, or what do they call it when it's a drama, but it's a documentary? Their word for it? Docudrama, thank you. I knew there was a mashup. But he makes this comment that walking and talking are both great, but they should never be done together. And I do like going for a hike by myself. Just the sounds, the animals that you get to see. Taking teenagers hiking is a waste of time. You're loud. You know that about yourself, right? The animals hear you coming. But when I'm by myself, I can be still. Okay, so I'm very curious. Your intro at the very beginning, I'm curious of what your thoughts are, if you're willing to share them in front of the group.
There's an old proverb, Chinese proverb, not a real proverb, Chinese proverb. So take it for what it's worth. Okay. I hear and I forget. I see and I remember. I do and I understand.
Yeah.
And that's the way I learn. I got to be kinesthetic, and so that's when I talk about being hands-on. I want a ruler in the kid's hands. I want a protractor. I want a compass. I want a fossil. I want a mineral. I want a plant. I want a fish. Whatever. I want a drill press in the engineering class because I don't want to put together a robot that's prefabricated. I want them to, build it themselves from raw materials. So we have power tools. I totally get the chemistry thing. I don't because those labs, a lot of them are, especially like the AP level labs, are so sophisticated, and some of that stuff they don't even know why it does what it does. It changes all sorts of colors and everything, but there's no explanation and no value in it really. So I kind of stay away from those. But acid base, I like bringing in even like in biology class, we're doing enzymes, digestive enzymes. So we bring in lots of different foods, and then we test them for presence of protein. You can't see a protein, but you can taste it. So that's tying into senses, that kind of thing. Check the pH level of household things. So you got a practical application of it, and then you can start making those associations elsewhere. Oh, this bleach, is that NH3, NH4 thing. Oh, that's coming into play.
Big deal, yeah.
That's base.
Right.
Well, why? Okay. So anything to make some connections to the real world, to where it's not just a bunch of blah 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 talking.
Right.
The least I can lecture, and the more that they can just go and do, I feel like I'm being successful.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, that's good. And I think that I don't know that I'll ever get to it. I'm just probably going to acknowledge my limitations. But if anybody else wants to do it, you can have my idea. I want to see a lab book built around the great discoveries throughout history. I think this would be unbelievably valuable to us as classical science teachers. So you read, you can do some. I've done this a little bit, like with Galileo's. You can do an inclined plane. You can do a water clock, or you can do a pendulum. Robbie is obsessed with pendulums. He's always doing pendulums. But there's some really interesting stuff that we can get from kind of recreating or trying to understand those experiments in real ways. Again, it's a lot of class time. It's not very efficient. I can't say what that's going to do to the number of standards that you hope to accomplish. But again, if science is a way of doing natural philosophy, and we just keep that in mind, we know who is really about truth, then the world actually kind of gets bigger and doesn't get smaller.
Well, one of the best things I probably do in terms of classical is we do a whole section on Ptolemy where we go back and we read some of his original writing, where he's proving that the Earth does not move,
pretty convincingly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And which is great with seventh graders because they think, we're 21st century kids, we're so smart, And then you start reading this guy, and he's so intelligent, and the sentence structure is so complex. It took me 45 minutes to read the first paragraph when I first went through it, just to understand where he was coming from and stuff. But so we go through like 4 sections of that, and they have to write a paper at the end, and they have to. But all the way through, what we're doing is, from what you know today, can you disprove Ptolemy? And it's
they probably
very hard.
can't. Yeah.
So
most of us don't really have any good evidence for. Most of us don't have good evidence for the heliocentric model.
Yeah, right.
Other than we trust the smart people that told us.
Smart people, big calculator.
Smart people, big calculator. Thank you for your time and attention. Keep each other in your prayers and support. This is a tough thing that we're trying to do, but the kids are worth it. So.